Text this morning comes from Genesis chapter 13. Be reading all 18 verses. Follow along as I read from Genesis chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself and all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. This is the second of three threats to the promise that come right on the heels of the extravagant blessing promised to Abram in the first three verses of chapter 12. Last week we saw the first threat, which was the famine in the land. And so Abram and Sarai go down from Canaan to Egypt that they might find food to eat. And when they're there, Abram is worried because his 65-year-old wife is drop dead gorgeous, absolutely going to get him in trouble. And so he devises a plan that he will lie to Pharaoh. And though Abram is not being held up as an example that we ought to lie and everything will go our way, no, the story is not about Abram as a great example for us. The story is about the invincibility of God's promise. So even though Abram gets in the way, despite himself, Abram and Sarai leave Pharaoh's presence, sent out of Egypt, and they leave with great blessing because God's promises are inviolable. In fact, we see this connection. Look at chapter 12, verse 10. They sojourned there, into the verse, for the famine was severe. The word severe in Hebrew is kaved. You may have heard before the word kavod or kabod, which is the Hebrew word for glory. It's the same word here, glory, heaviness, severity. It says the famine was severe, and then in chapter 13, verse 2, it says, now Abraham was very kaved, exact same word translated as rich. The kaved of the famine has now become the kaved, the weightiness, the severity, the gravity of Abram's wealth. Such is God's promise that he turned famine into blessing. Now the second threat comes, and it comes by way of those very riches, the relational conflict that results from these riches. And here we have Abram in a much more flattering light. And we see that Abram is a better example here because the story begins and ends with worship. You notice in verse 3, he retraces his steps. He journeyed from the Negeb, that's the sort of the desert region in the south, up to the north to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. So he retraces his steps. He goes to the very first place he was when he entered the promised land. He may be returning to the very same altar there, a pile of stones he would have built up as an altar to the Lord. And again, verse 4, he calls upon the name of the Lord. So this episode begins with Abram worshiping at an altar. And look at how it ends, verse 18. Abram moved his tent, came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord, an altar at the beginning and at the end. Worship, bookending this story. An altar in the north, an altar in the south. Last week I said that Genesis is not mainly a book of examples. It's a story about God's providence and God's promises. But we are right to look to Genesis for different examples, either good or bad. Shouldn't say that, well, if we're really gospel people, we never look to the Bible for examples. No, the New Testament does this. 1 Corinthians 10:6. Now these things took place as examples for us that we might not desire as evil as they did. Talking about the rebellion in the wilderness. Paul says that is a negative example. Don't do that. We also see in a place like Hebrews 11, the hall of fame of faith, the great cloud of witnesses, that there we have men and women who are meant to be positive examples for us. And so we're right to draw certain lessons from the patriarchs, the matriarchs along the way. This morning, I want you to note two lessons from Abram. He provides for us a lesson in peacemaking and a lesson in faith. And we'll spend most of the time on the first. So, a lesson in peacemaking. You can understand why there's conflict. Simply, there's not enough room. You have too many kids sharing one bedroom in your house. Let the reader understand. Yes, there's bound to be conflict. The Canaanites are there. The Perizzites are there, verse 7. These people probably maintained grazing rights, water and drinking rights. And you have Lot, who's accrued great wealth, and you have Abram, who's accrued great wealth, and there simply isn't enough room. One of the things we're going to see throughout Genesis is that domestic trouble follows the patriarchs wherever they go. Be some encouragement to us. There are lots of messed up families in the world, and pretty much every family in Genesis fits that description. We had domestic quarreling in the first episode. We got a husband and wife trying to deceive. Now you have a domestic quarrel between uncle and nephew. We all can imagine what this is like. You ever try to go on vacation with your extended family together? You all try to live in the same house over the holidays. You have to share or split an inheritance. I haven't really watched these shows, but if I understand the basic premise of Survivor or Big Brother or any of the newer reality TV shows, it's basically, let's put a lot of sinful people in one space together, let's make it very stressful, and let's record what they do and show the worst stuff. It is sort of a lesson in the reality of original sin. And so we can understand you have big family, lots of stuff, big family, lots of stuff. They don't have enough room. What's going to happen? It's bound to happen. Recently, an older friend of mine who's sort of semi-retired said, well, I'm thinking with the kids of buying some acreage, and we'd build a house there, and my kids would build their houses, and we'd all share this land, and we'd have parents and kids and grandkids and 3 generations. Be wonderful. What do you think? I said, that sounds wonderful. Probably could be. Just make sure you really, 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 really like each other, and you really, really, really like to forgive one another, and maybe it can work. But even the best of people squeezed into tight places over time, are going to have conflict. So the first aspect of this lesson is that sometimes in peacemaking, we have to give up our rights. Now, let me underline the word sometimes. I didn't say always. There are some times where you're very right to insist upon your rights. We see that in the book of Acts. Paul sometimes says, okay, I'm getting persecuted, bring it on. And other times he says, no, I'm a citizen of Rome, how dare you? And for Paul, the wisdom was whether defending his rights would help defend the rights of other Christians, in which case he was going to defend himself to the uttermost, or whether he was the only one who was to suffer. So I am not saying that it's wrong to ever go to court or to pursue justice. Certainly it is appropriate. So don't hear sometimes as always give up your rights. And yet, if we're honest, for many of us, most of us, the danger is not always, the danger is never. We never give up our rights. Here's Abram. He's likely older. He's the uncle. Lot is the nephew. Abram is the leader of the clan. And as they're having conflict, it was perfectly within his right that he would call the shots. And if they have to go their separate ways, Abram would get to lay claim to the spot that he wanted most for his family. But he doesn't do that. And there's no sense here that he's just sort of scheming. No, you go first. No, you go first, uncle. No, you go first. If that was the plan, then it really went poorly. No, Lot, you go first. Okay, I will. Well, he does. And Lot looks up and he chooses the land that looks to him like the Garden of Eden. What an example of magnanimity from Abram. You can imagine the Israelites hearing this story for the first time. They may have said to each other, can you believe Father Abraham? He almost gave the promised land to Lot. And you know who comes from Lot? The Moabites and the Ammonites. Can you imagine that? The Moabites and the Ammonites almost inherited the promised land. But Abram understood that so far as he has the promise of God on his side, he has no way to come out of this except ahead. And so he says, Lot, you take the first choice. When you have two people or two parties absolutely in what seems to be an unresolvable conflict, there's really only two things that can happen. Either you bring in some outside person or group to mediate, the police, a court, the pastors or elders or some official arbitration, and says, okay, you're right, you're wrong, or you're both a little right and a little wrong, and here's how we're dividing it up, go do it. That's one way. Or someone on both or either side decides to give up some of their rights. Do you always, in conflict, insist on your rights? Husbands, wives, are you looking for an opportunity to be the first one to break the thaw in your marriage? When there's that deep freeze that comes upon you with some conflict? I think this is incumbent especially upon husbands as the leaders in the home. And even if you think, well, it's really 10% my fault and it's 90% her fault, guys, I would check those percentages, but even if that were the case, can you in your 10% take the first step toward the other person? Give up, renounce something of your rights? Can you, brothers and sisters, and I'm talking kids, literal brothers and sisters in the home, here's very practical for you. Do you ever give your brother or your sister the chance to choose first? Where to sit at dinner? What piece of pizza to get? What bowl of ice cream? What toy to play with? Do you ever let them? Even if you are the older one and you think you ought to go first, do you ever give up your rights? And listen, because I know what kids are like. Don't go home around the table and say, see, did you hear? Pastor said you should give up your rights. No, that's not, no. Listen for yourself before you listen for somebody else. Proverbs says it's a glory to overlook an offense. Jesus says that with the measure you used, it will be measured to you. Now, when Jesus says do not judge, he doesn't mean you can never evaluate, you can never analyze, because Jesus goes on to say, don't cast your pearls before swine. So he's judging, there's pigs out there. What he means is, think about how you size up other people. Would you like people to size you up in the same way? Are you the sort of person who gives people the benefit of the doubt? Or do you put the worst possible construct on their motives? Are you the sort of person who is eager to find a way for peace? Or are you the sort of person who says, I stand my ground. Every conflict in my life, I'm like Martin Luther, here I stand, I can do no other. Is that you? Abram was willing to give up his right. Lot, go ahead. You choose. Peacemaking sometimes means that we graciously go in opposite directions. That's the second aspect. Again, let me underline the word sometimes. Don't leave this service saying, I guess I can get a divorce. I guess I never have to talk to her again. I guess quitting at the first sign of conflict was the right decision after all. No, that's not the point. But we do see here with Abram and Lot that they parted ways, not in an effort to avoid reconciliation, but in an effort to maintain the unity of the family. And that's the difference. This was not saying we give up on each other. It's saying because we are committed to each other, verse 8, we are kinsmen, we're family, and because we want to maintain the family, we're going to have to find some way, and this place just ain't big enough for the both of us. We see this from time to time in Scripture. Paul and Barnabas, most famously. You have these church leaders, brothers in the Lord, son of encouragement, the great apostle Paul. And at the end of Acts 15, they can't agree. Do we take John Mark with us or not? Barnabas wants to. Paul's not so sure. They reached agreement, presumably at the Jerusalem Council. They could come eye to eye on great theological, ethical matters, but it came to, do we take this young man with us or not? And they simply could not agree. And so they had to part. It may have sounded spiritual for Abram to say, look, we're all family. We all worship the same God. If we truly love each other, we should be able to find a way to live together in this crowded space. But the Bible's more realistic than that. The Bible's never cynical, but it's always realistic. The Bible knows that utopia is not possible on earth. And if you expect your family to be utopia, your church to be utopia, your country to be utopia, if that's how the government rules, if that's how your church, things go from bad to worse. Even with family, especially with family, we get into conflicts. And here, in Abram's case, the best solution was not, well, if we just lay down enough rules, or if we just have some more meetings. The best solution, two families, we need to go live in separate places. This was not an angry separation marking the end of the relationship. It was a peaceful separation to preserve the relationship. And we don't want to rush to this conclusion, give up at the first sign of conflict. God has many valuable things to teach us about ourselves through relational strain. But we do have to keep in mind Romans 12:18. Insofar as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. That has always stuck with me in life and in pastoral ministry because it's so wonderfully hopeful and wonderfully realistic. Insofar as it depends on you, be at peace with all people. You can control what you do. You can't control if other people want to be at peace with you. You can't control if people want to be jerks to you. But insofar as it depends on you, you put forth every effort to live at peace, particularly with our families and with our brothers and sisters in Christ. We do all that we can do, and sometimes all that we can do is all that we can do. And you say, I don't know what else we can do. We simply have to agree to disagree. It can be the better part of leadership at times to not set up another meeting, not to hash things through again, but to move on. And so we find it here that sometimes it is the better part of peacemaking to say, you need to go your way and I need to go mine.